Hello everybody and welcome to this very special episode of the Arqus Knowledge Pills at Globe23 Festival here in Leipzig. My name is Josephine. I'm the Communication Officer of the Arqus European Alliance at Leipzig University, and I will try and guide you through the next hour, you and our guests who are here live. And by now you've heard the name Arqus a few times already, so you might have guessed it's quite important for this event. What is Arqus? Arqus is the European University Alliance that was founded in 2019. It unites universities of Granada, Graz, Leipzig, Lyon 1, Maynooth, Minho, Padua, Vilnius and Wrocław. And this is episode 23 of the Arqus podcast, the Arqus Knowledge Pills. Once a month in the podcast, we introduce listeners to research that is happening at the Arqus universities. It's usually a 15-minute interview with one researcher of one of the 9 universities. But as I already said, today is special and different. As I already told you, we're going to be here for 1 hour, which is a longer format. And you see 3 people with me today instead of just 1. So let me please introduce our guests. On stage with me is Claudia Wendt. If you work, study, or research at Leipzig University, you might know her as the Deanery Council of the Faculty of Mathematics and Computer Sciences. She is, however, also doing her doctorate at the Institute for Higher Education Research on the topic of the conditions for success in international university cooperations, using the examples of the European University Alliances, such as Arqus, for example. Which brings me to our next guest on the screen, Fernando Galán from Granada. He is the consortium manager of the Arqus European University Alliance. Fernando has tons of experience working on European higher education policies. For example, he has worked at the European Association of Higher Education Institutions and served as president of the European Students' Association. And we've been keeping it pretty European so far, but thanks to our third guest, we're going global, or at least a little less European. Dr. Harvey is here with us from the United States. He is currently Vice Provost for International Affairs at the University of Minnesota. He is an experienced leader of international programs in higher education and a scholar in the field of international education. Harvey is not unfamiliar with Arqus, though, as he is the member of our International Advisory Board of the Alliance. Welcome to our guests, and thank you so much for taking the time. Okay, let's get into it. Claudia, I've said European Universities Alliances a lot by now. Can you tell us, in basic terms, what are those alliances? Why do they exist? And why are these forms of collaboration in demand?
Yes, before I dive into that a bit deeper, I would like to make a few remarks because we have the Bologna process in the title as well. It's titled Bologna 2.0, How European Higher Education Alliances Are Changing Research and Studies. I'm not so sure that we're actually going to answer this question today, but I think we can make at least a few suggestions of what we see fit to actually get there and make alliances successful. At least that's my goal for the hour. And as it's titled Bologna 2.0, there has been a 1.0. So I would like to start out talking a little bit about the Bologna process as it started out and what it had in mind or what the goal was. So the main objective of the Bologna process was and still is to create a European higher education area where students can freely float around the European higher education system, which led to standardized study programs in undergraduate and postgraduate study programs. And it aimed at creating, European citizens that are actually educated for the European labor market. And we could talk about if this was successful or if we have succeeded and if we already are there. But the European University Alliances, the Bologna 2.0 aspect, they actually set out to become the next step, to take it to the next level, to actually achieve that goal that Bologna 1.0 maybe has missed out on. We could discuss that. I also have to mention that European universities as an idea have been around for a while. There has been a German entrepreneur in the 1950s who set out to create the community of intelligence as early as 1950. And this idea didn't take off because it didn't get, the political support it needed. And the French followed this suggestion. Also, the Italians had ideas about that in the 70s. But it never got to the point of actually, coming into existence. In 2017, that changed with President Macron's speech at Sorbonne, where he actually demanded setting up European universities to achieve that. And that was the starting point, really, from which, the funding started. And in fall 2024, there will be 60 such alliances that contain 500 European universities from all around the European Union. And that is quite remarkable because that makes 10% of all European universities. So that is quite a force, and they can actually achieve a lot. But the European Commission, who funds the program, also, of course, has put high stakes on those alliances. There is a lot that they have to achieve. And I'm sure Fernando can elaborate on that much deeper than I can. But these objectives are huge. And to achieve that, you need a good structure, you need committed people, and you need a plan. And that's where it gets tricky, because you need the structure, you need a governance structure, you need to align all those different goals, all these different partners, bring into the collaboration. And collaboration in itself is a concept that can be tricky. I would like to maybe talk about that in more detail a little bit later on, because I think maybe we should let the others talk a little bit.
Who wants to go first? Fernando, maybe you can talk a little bit about Arqus, how it came about, and
Thank you, Claudia, for your reflections. I must say, it's very interesting for me to listen to you also from your researcher's perspective, because I was quite much hands-on for the last few years, because in my previous roles in Brussels-based organizations, I was also involved in the Bologna process and working also in drafting the communiques and all the work in the Bologna, and the huge question about how to revitalize Bologna. And precisely, I think that this idea of the European University Initiative gave a new impetus to different policy processes. We should not forget that Bologna is a process that it's not from the universities. The Bologna Declaration was signed by the ministries of education. It was not signed by the actual community, it was by the policymakers. And they set up a series of goals, very interesting goals, and they were welcomed by the university communities later. But it was mainly a governmental process or intergovernmental process. with a huge impetus when it started, and good outcomes that we are enjoying now, or partly nowadays. But also that with time, it went a little bit not so interesting, or not so much into the top priority list of some governments. It's a voluntary process. So it means that whatever the governments agreed within the Bologna process, they have to make it a reality back at their systems. So they might agree on implementing the ECTS system, but if they don't actually go back at home and do it, it will never happen. And that's what we suffer from the last agreements within the Bologna process, that some of them were agreed. They were huge and very useful tools, like the European approach for joint accreditation of joint programs, to simplify processes of joint programs. But that agreement backs to 2015 and was very rarely used. They were only about 11 times used until 2 years ago, until the European Universities Initiative started to develop actual joint programs at the European level. And there was a need for a process for accrediting those joint programs. So it's very interesting. I think that also, as Claudia said, we are not reinventing the wheel. In Europe, there was initiatives of trying to bring together different inter-university initiatives. You have the European University Institute in Fiesole in Italy. You have the College of Europe. So you have other attempts to do something similar to one level of success. I mean, they are working and they are very good examples. But indeed, I think that the speech from Macron in 2017, which I think it has a completely different background on what he actually intended to what we are actually doing in reality, it gave a new impetus to collaboration. And I think it's important because this impetus, obviously, there is some sort of a steering from the European Commission, but the actors, the actual agents of change, are the universities and the universities communities. So, okay, they gave the carrot, let's say, in order for us all to start moving, but who sets the priority, who sets what we want to do together, it's actually the universities that are part of the alliances, and that's a very interesting process. It's quite similar at the end of the day to the Bologna. I mean, we can agree many things, but then it depends in our internal regulations, in our legislative national frameworks, and so on. So it's okay, we have to discuss many things, we have to agree on many things, but then how we actually make them a reality back at home, back to our communities, it's not always as simple as it might seem. And maybe I will stop here and then we continue with the questions with the rest of the colleagues.
Harvey, as you know Arqus, you know the European University Alliance program, but you have a different view on it. In the United States, you don't have these kinds of alliances, and we seek them in Europe. What, in your view, what's the main difference?
Indeed. We do not have these kinds of alliances in the United States, but as someone who has participated on the International Advisory Board of Arqus, I have been, as it were, an outsider looking in. And I have to tell you, over the past 4 or 5 years, I've been incredibly envious, if anything, at the forces of this process of alliances, certainly from the perspective of Arqus, has unleashed as universities come together to determine the kind of community of intelligence, if you will, that they will create among themselves going forward. And as someone who has been an international educator for a very long time, this process has truly impressed me, because I do not believe that the central goal of these alliances has been to internationalize these institutions. However, that is precisely what is happening as these institutions come together and talk about a kind of vision they can embrace to advance research and scholarship and teaching and to prepare a kind of student, if you will, a kind of product to meet the demands of the 21st century. So again, You know, I want to cite or underscore the term that has been used by Claudia and Fernando, collaboration. And so the question becomes, is this collaboration useful only for the institutions that are part of these alliances? Is collaboration useful only for the European Union? Or, as international educators, do we have to think of collaboration ultimately as a global project? Can we have a community of intelligence separate from the rest of the world? Is that truly viable? And I happen to think that as an international educator that has been driven over the years to move this aspect of the academy from the margins to the center, there is also realization that at the end of the day, this also has to be a global project. And we have to engage with other parts of the world to truly realize the ideals associated with these alliances. Maybe I'll stop there and for the time being.
Because your introductory question was why are cooperations or collaborations so highly in demand? Well, because it's the situation that really forces us into it. We do have a lot of challenges in the world, in society, in a globalized world. As Harvey just said, we do need collaboration to actually take on the challenges. No one can do it by themselves. You know, the topics are just too big to tackle for one institution alone. We have migration issues, we have terrorism, we have the whole topic of climate change. These are all like big topics, and we do need a lot of brilliant minds to, you know, work on them and to make it better. And so we need to set the stage for actually these minds to think internationally and maybe interdisciplinary, and we have to immerse them in an experience that actually makes them want to collaborate. But there's also another side of things, and that might be, the moment where I start talking a bit about my research project. I have conducted 44 interviews with different stakeholders in and around such alliances. And all of them pretty much stated that the collaboration side of things also basically roots in thoughts on competition. So where there is cooperation, there's also competition. Those two go together, and I find that quite interesting because we do see a lot of competition in and around these collaborations, these alliances as well. So what are they competing for or against? They do that on different levels, really. You have the alliances that compete against each other when trying out for funding. You have the organizations within the alliance that, you know, collaborate in certain parts, but are still competitors in the field when it comes to, you know, allocating resources like third-party funding. And you also have the researchers who, in the individual organization, are in competition with one another. So you cannot really divide those two. They are a pair. And you need to be aware of that when forming such alliances. So that would be a statement that I would like to challenge my co-speakers with.
Well, I would offer that in some ways collaboration and competition may be at different points on the continuum. And it is not unreasonable to imagine that a competition could actually at some point destroy collaboration. The alliances represent a substantive and rather intentional commitment to collaborate for very distinct ends. But of course, when we begin thinking of competition, we think of the scramble, if you will, for intellectual capital. Every institution wants to have the best mind, the best scholar, the best graduate students to work in labs or whatever to support the research agenda. Every institution wants to be ranked. You know, we're still very much yoked to this notion of who is number one and who is in the top 100 universities. And I would argue that, yes, indeed, at the end of the day, we are human beings, and we find it very difficult to engage in collaborative activity exclusively. There is always, it seems, the elements of competition. But I think it's important within the context of this conversation about alliances and what they aim to achieve, to really also talk about competition and to acknowledge the ways in which competition sometimes can be incredibly toxic and can actually undermine and even destroy some of the gains that are achieved as a result of collaboration.
If I may. Yes, I think it's a very interesting idea and research question, actually. Indeed, I mean, collaboration and competition will be two sides of the same coin from my point of view. And this is our daily lives also when we apply for jobs and collaborate with colleagues, but also for researchers when they have to collaborate for top research papers where they have to collaborate, but at the same time, it's their own sake and their own career that they need actually to get huge results in order to progress. I think within the alliances is the same. I mean, Arqus got selected in the first round. We were only just 17 alliances, but the competition was huge and has continued to be huge in applications for the different calls. Even for renewal, there has been alliances had which were not successful in the renewal of their funding. So there is indeed competition at the level of alliances, although I must say there is a huge collaboration between alliances, and we are collaborating in informal networks between alliances because at the end of the day, we have similar targets or goals between us. We are not all the same or trying to do the same, but we have similar objectives. And indeed, also within the alliances as well, but I would like to make a reflection, and I think that's in the whole European spirit, that united we are stronger. And that's the idea I think that Arqus brings us to, that, okay, maybe Leipzig might be a top university in X and Y, but Padua might be a top university in Z and X. And being together, we unite our forces, and we are much better in many different fields. Same and likewise, not in terms of top researchers we may have in our universities, top minds, as Harvey said, but also in terms of infrastructure. If we think smart, there might be investment from different universities where, I don't know, the University of Granada might have a huge research infrastructure that due to this alliance can be shared with the other universities that don't have to invest such a huge proportion of money in that area, and they can use it in other areas, because being in this alliance, being together, means we also are trusted friends, and we give access to each other to different facilities. So it's not just in terms of the strengths, in terms of minds and research groups, but also in terms of infrastructure, support admin staff. We have also huge professionals in our universities that are quite experienced in writing project applications and so on, that we can help each other a lot. Something that I would like to mention, which for me makes the alliances a completely different animal from other type of initiatives, is that this transcends the usual ways of collaboration. It's not just my research group with the other research group, or it's not just my faculty that goes through the International Relations Office of my university that gets in touch with the International Relations Office of the other university and gets in touch with that faculty. It actually makes the different groups and communities together. So now we have the people working on access working together with the people working on access in the different universities. And there is no intermediates. There is no international relations office that are acting as intermediates, as it was the usual way of collaborating. So that makes that different units in different universities, like in Arqus, are working together and are exchanging practices, are exchanging ways of doing, and that enriches a lot the alliances.
Thank you so much, everyone. I think we now know the vision and the ideals we all have in mind concerning the university alliances, but as also sorry, getting my English wrong. We also already mentioned that it's not as easy as every big process is, as every big new idea is. So, Claudia, from your research, how did you find that higher education institutions work in alliances on the actual work level, and how do they maybe need to transform at university level to accomplish that cooperation?
I would like to take a small step back before I answer that, because I think it's really important to know why they're actually participating in these alliances. So what are their personal goals? And I looked at, or I spoke with very different stakeholders, from vice presidents and rectors to international office employees to project coordinators within the alliances, but also with professors and researchers. So, and it depends on who you ask, really, what their goals and aims and are in participating. And I found a research study that gives us like 3 approaches to that. So there's a functional approach. There is a strategic approach, and an organic approach. So the functional approach would be to actually secure your own standing within the field of other organizations. So to make sure your organization survives within competition against others. That's why you are entering an alliance, because, as Fernando said, together we're stronger. The strategic approach would be, allocating resources, as many as you possibly can, which means financial resources, but also the top minds, and also, technological resources in terms of digitalization and things like that, infrastructure. And the organic approach would be to use the alliance, or to see it as a chance to learn as an organization and to become better at as an organization. And the interesting part of it was, depending on whom you asked, they had, a different approach to the topic. Looking at the leadership representatives, they were more on the side of the strategic approach, of course, looking at resources and how to get them. The coordinators were actually more on the functional side. They just wanted to secure what's there and manage it. And the professors and the researchers were actually going, for the most part, about the organic approach, which I found quite remarkable, because they're actually the ones who get all the funding in for an organization to work. So that was interesting and surprising for me to find in the material.
And it seems surprising, but also somehow makes sense, at least on the project side and the strategic higher up side. Okay, so do you think like universities right now are capable for this kind of cooperation? I mean, they are, because we've been in this alliance since 2019. But what do you see does have to happen in the transformational process in the institution?
That might sound like common sense and really simple, but it's not, as we've already, referred. You need to align all those different goals and mindsets, really, and you need to find a way of communicating and negotiating a common base, really, for all the stakeholders involved. And as simple as that sounds, it's really hard work. And there has been a string of research in strategic theory emerging since the early years in 2000, which is called Strategy as Practice, that actually looks at processes like that from a micro-institutional viewpoint. So they really sit in the meetings when, the commissions get together and discuss things and make decisions happen. And they look at how they are actually approaching that. And from attending all these meetings, they get, a sense of how you have to communicate, what kind of people are sitting together, what do we need to actually have an informed decision-making ready, who needs to be involved. All those factors are actually questions of governance, really, but they're also in the very moment of communicating with each other in a commission meeting. And what we see there is that it's always good to have a plan going into a commission meeting, but also being open enough to hear other arguments and to widen your perspective. And it highly depends on whom you have sitting at the table. How do you actually live participation?
Okay, Fernando, maybe you've been waiting for your chance already. Hands-on experience, what do you see in the progress we made in the Alliance so far? What are the big positives, and what do you see is still we have to work on?
Thank you. Very good question. I was actually thinking when listening to that, Claudia, I remember, as you said, as Arqus as an idea started back in 2018. It was elected in 2019, and since then, a lot of things have happened. But I remember when I joined Arqus as consortium manager, and there was this idea of going around to the different faculties at the University of Granada, trying to explain what Arqus is, what we are trying to do. And back then, Arqus was just an idea. There was nothing tangible to show to the colleagues. But as Claudia said, many of them came and asked, okay, but what is there for me? How can I benefit from Arqus? What can I contribute to even? And obviously, it was a completely different perspective, an idea if that will come from a senior researcher, a senior academic who already have a huge, probably international network and collaborates with different researchers from different universities. And there is no way that you will force that type of researchers into a new type of collaboration. You will have early stage researchers and PhD students which are forming their networks, and their opportunities within the Alliance can be different. It could be also a way of actually developing those networks. The students, which they will be looking into completely different things than researchers. The leadership, obviously being researchers themselves, but also being managers of the institutions. What they will be looking there, and if you will look to the heads of the faculties or the deans, they will be, okay, but for my faculty, for my students, for my researchers, what can I do through Arqus? And obviously other administrative and professional staff within the university. So it was very difficult back then to say, okay, we are planning to do this and why and set, and then pandemic comes and ruins all our wonderful plans. So nowadays it's much easier to communicate and to explain and to show examples of what we are doing. But back then was terrible, difficult. Sorry. I think that I identify myself within the group of people that Claudia said, of those trying to see the alliances as pathfinders, as an opportunity to imagine the universities of the future. The world has changed and universities have survived throughout, but the universities that we have nowadays have very little to do with the universities in the Middle Ages, and the universities adapted to those new realities. And that's what we are living right now. The world is changing, the access to information is changing, the challenges are changing, and if we do not change our institutions, we will not survive. And I think the solution precisely comes through the European University Initiative, or part of the solution. I'm not saying this is the one thing that will solve all world problems. But I think also one of the challenges that you were asking me for is like this idea of reaching consensus. We are transcending our ways of doing, not only at our universities as such, but we are also set in different cultures and different national frameworks with different rules and regimes and laws. And therefore, it's not only about what we do, what we are trying to do, and the different priorities, which I think that through Arqus, we have managed to, or we have tried to align the priorities of the Alliance quite a lot with the priorities of the different universities, and this is constant work, so that we actually served to the priorities of the different universities, and we work together in those joint priorities, but also how we do it. And this how, it's the most difficult part, I must say. This is heading my head against the wall daily, on the daily basis almost, because you have 9 different universities with 9 different cultures and 9 different ways of simple things as organizing the days and the working schedule at the day. So when you call for a meeting, it's a huge question actually, or how you organize the meeting. And some universities are much used to a very strict meetings where you have a very strict agenda and it's very straightforward, yes, yes, no, 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 yes. Whether the universities are more used to a more flexible approach, and they prefer to actually discuss things during the meetings. So combining all these different cultures, it's a huge challenge. I think it also enriches us because it teaches also us a lot of intercultural skills, but at some point also it might be a bit frustrating for all the colleagues, but I think this is part of the learning experience also of the alliances.
I can totally agree from personal experience as well, working in the alliance. It is sometimes difficult, but also very rewarding. Harvey, you've been nodding enthusiastically. From your point of view, also on the International Advisory Board, you've seen Arqus through the years. What is your view on it?
Yeah, well, to just quickly pick up on what Fernando was just saying, some of the challenges associated in making these alliances work, I think is a reflection of the challenge of the human condition. But when we understand and accept that the greatest challenges confronting humankind are global in nature, and the only way that they will be solved, that they can be solved, is by coming together, by us collaborating with scholars and policymakers and different stakeholders from around the world in order to first understand these challenges and then find solutions to them. I think truly it's the only way. And often when I talk to my students or I give talks, I like to use the pandemic as an example of this because it's still so fresh and recent in our experience. The way that we found therapies to deal with COVID, the way that we found vaccines to immunize against COVID was precisely by having groups of scholars around the world collaborating with one another, literally around the clock. And for the first time in human history, we were able to find therapies and vaccines in record time in order to deal and to confront with this global challenge. And so this is what makes me think that the alliances, Arqus and all of the others, represent a model whose time has come, and more than that, represent a model that is imperative for academic engagement in the 21st century. We have to collaborate. There is no ifs or buts about that. So I really believe that the alliances have become a model to which all of us, not only institutions, not only the 10% within the European Union, but all of the academy, both within the EU and outside the EU, must seriously consider as a way going forward and as a way to address some of the unique challenges presented to us in the 21st century. But of course, a big part of what makes the alliances work is funding. All right. And this is not something we can take for granted. You know, what we have seen in the European Union is a kind of political will, a determination that this model of collaborating is important and it's good and it's even necessary. And therefore, because it has achieved a level of strategic importance, the resources have been thrown after it, so to speak, to make it work. And so if we are thinking about having this kind of model on a global scale, I think funding will be a critical element of this. And the other aspect of this also would be accountability. I think Fernando made it clear earlier on that you know, participation in these alliances are voluntary. But the extent that you make a commitment to engage in these alliances and you accept the funding that comes with it, you're held accountable for producing results. And so again, you know, to what extent should we really consider this model, which I think is working thus far, even though relatively recent, but it is working. To what extent should we consider these kinds of alliances going beyond the EU, or even European alliances looking at pulling into these relationships institutions outside of the EU. I know, for example, with Aurora, which is another alliance, they have done just that, and they have invited us, the University of Minnesota, to be part of that alliance. And I'm tickled by this opportunity and really looking forward to the kinds of experiences we will have to collaborate with our European partner institutions within the context of this alliance to achieve important objectives around research and scholarship and teaching and student experience.
Yeah, congratulations on the invitation from Aurora. Exciting. We're already kind of moving into our last topic for today, and Harvey already set this up a bit. So let's say the universities and the alliances are working well together, we're achieving even more. Question is, how do we transfer these accomplishments, these results, into the outside world? The maybe non-academic world as well, and what's the future of the alliances, or what would you like to see as the future of the alliances?
I think I'll leave the first aspect of your question to Fernando, but I would like to talk about the second part of it. We already see that in some alliances because as the European Commission set it up, you have to have a geographical, well, now I'm lacking the word. You have to have 9 universities from, you know, different regions in Europe. And we already see that they are getting different fundings Of course, they get the funding from Erasmus Plus and Horizon Europe, but there's also national funding in Germany, for instance, and even more so in France. Not so much in maybe universities or countries in Eastern Europe. So there is a divide there already within the funding part. And that might lead, can lead, also already leads to problems within alliances. Because those who are better funded have to take more responsibility for the whole of the alliance. And there are complications at the horizon already on how to, work with that. So my question would be, do we actually, or what will be left of these alliances once the funding stops? And I'm not so sure if they can be, self-sustainable. Or if they can be as strong as they are getting now in the future when there is this political will behind them. And once that's gone, I don't actually know if we're on a good track there. And I don't know the plans the European Commission has with those alliances. And they will not be able to fund them forever. So I'm actually, I'm worried.
Again, collaboration versus competition. Fernando, do you want to say something to this?
To answer your first question first, if you don't mind, and then come back to this issue. And I think transfer of outputs, and I think that's the daily life of the universities in whatever society we are at. We are not ivory towers anymore. We are serving societies. And that's what our taxpayers give also money to the universities to perform some task. So obviously it's the educational aspect, and we have to educate in different ways that we have been doing so far. That goes through joint programs, but also through micro-credentials and other ways of learning and teaching, other ways of collaborating. There was also the notion of interdisciplinary, but also research-intense learning experience also. So we have to teach and learn in different ways that we have been doing so far. So that's one way. Another way, I think, is also bringing our community, our societal community with us. So in Arqus also we have a number of associate partners from our cities, from our regions, so local authorities, business sectors, NGOs, and other types of collaboration. So I think that's also quite important, how we engage them in issues like science with and for society, in open science, in collaboration, also in terms of education, but also about how we do take care about our cultural heritage, for example. Those are just a few examples. But also, and I think that one of the most important ones is the systemic impact the alliances may have. I said at the beginning, we are pathfinders. We are finding new ways of collaboration. This has to be also find its way into the current legislative frameworks we have. I will give an example of Arqus, for example. We wrote in our first applications, we will have these joint masters between the different universities. And when we wrote it, it was legally not possible to have joint masters in Spain. Because of that, we lobbied our government, we convinced them this was a good idea, and there were legislative reforms in several countries allowing us to do these joint master's degrees. So that's also systemical impact, because it's something not only for the few lucky ones that are in alliances, it's a new opportunity that is open because of us, but to the rest of the Spanish, in this case, university system. So I think that alliances are quite good at exactly like finding new ways of collaboration and opening these new ways of collaboration for other universities, which might or might not be in alliances. The issue of funding, indeed, is the elephant in the room all the time. And obviously something that concerns us all. I would say that if you look at the first 17 alliances, all of them had this magic rule of 80-20% co-funding. So 80% of the money came from the European Union and 20% came from their own sources. In the case of Arqus and one other alliance was upside down. It was the totally different opposite. So now, after having the accounts of the first 3 years of collaboration, I can say that the universities themselves invested a huge amount of resources from their own into make this thing a reality. So obviously that makes that there is an interest and that there's some sort of worthiness, let's say, in this also accountability part that Harvey mentioned. So obviously this could continue without European money, let's say. It will be difficult. We will have maybe to rethink and re-escalate some of the things. But at the same time, I think there is certain responsibility from the European Commission side. If they have thought of launching us all to this endeavor, if this is an idea of truly creating a European higher education system, and not just an area of systems, but a truly European system, we might need to tell our policymakers, you need to continue investing in education and in higher education into this new system we are creating. Likewise, in any national budget, you have a budget dedicated to higher education. So maybe what we have to lobby for, it's a continuously funding from the European Union. Obviously, this comes with accountability. We have to show the results. We have to be to pay, to give back to the policymakers and explain them what we are doing, what we are achieving. But also, let's not be naive. This is nothing granted. There is some money for secured until the end of this European Union Multi-Annual Financial Framework 2027. But we have to negotiate the next one, and we should not forget we have a war in our continent, which probably policymakers will be quite tempted to deviate resources to other sources rather than education. And we will have to continue making the point that education is also a way of avoiding happening those wars, and that this is totally worthy. It's not an easy task. We will need to do it all together because this is not only the colleagues working in Brussels. We have to convince the different colleagues and policymakers at the national grounds. But yeah, I think that it's a fight that is worth fighting for.
So Harvey, please, the future of the alliances, what do you see?
I've actually heard these kinds of anxieties about the future of funding for the alliances. And my response to that is that the alliances are not an end in themselves. They are a means to an end. And I think it is appropriate at the end for me to come back to this concept that was raised at the very beginning, collaboration. That is what the alliances were created for. Fernando talked about the war on the European continent right now. Well, I would argue that the European Union project was precisely created as a better pathway for moving forward as nations within Europe, as opposed to engaging in the battles and the struggles that characterize European history for hundreds of years. And it is my belief that to the extent that institutions can see the values associated with collaboration and find ways to institutionalize collaboration as part of what it means to be an institution of higher learning in the 21st century, that fears around funding would gradually dissipate. I also believe, finally, that the alliances really have an opportunity here to think more globally about this whole notion of collaboration, because again, research happens within a global context. Scholarship, teaching happens within a global context. The alliances cannot be on an island unto themselves. And so my hope is that that is precisely what will happen in the months and years ahead. And I look forward to a vibrant Arqus and a vibrant set of alliances within the European context, articulating a model for the rest of the global academy.
Thank you for being here, for taking the time, for talking with me and our audience. Thank you to the team of Globe23. And thank you for our audience here for being here and listening. And yeah, thank you so much.